They didn't bring food, they didn't bring blankets, or coal, or a single kind word for a woman who had buried her husband 3 weeks earlier. They brought iron. 7 sets, laid out on a courthouse table in Black Ridge, Montana Territory, in the first hard frost of October 1886. Small ones. Built for wrists no bigger than a broom handle. Logan Mitchell called it a lawful remedy. Hunter Collins called it his duty. Owen Parker, sitting behind the bench in his black robe, called it fair value owed to the Bank of Black Ridge, and he said it the way a man reads a grocery list. Jasmine Cooper sat in the front row with her 14-month-old daughter asleep against her shoulder and 6 more children pressed so close around her that the cold couldn't find a gap to get through. She had already lost the man who built that circle of children around her. She was not going to lose the circle too. Then the doors at the back of the hall opened, and the wind that came through them wasn't half as cold as the man who followed it in. Nobody in that room needed an introduction. They'd all heard the name whispered over card tables and church pews for 11 years. Always the same way, low and a little afraid. Garrett Lawson set a saddlebag heavy with silver on Owen Parker's bench, hard enough to rattle the gavel, and said the only sentence that mattered. "Put the chains away. I'm taking her. And all 7. If you've ever had people who were supposed to protect you decide instead to profit off you, stay close. This story is for you." Hello, gentle viewers, and thank you for being here. Before we go any further, if this story has already gotten under your skin, go ahead and hit subscribe, drop a like, and leave a comment. Tell us what city or country you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and I love knowing how far these stories travel. You're not just watching a video, you're joining a small, steady community of people who still believe a good story is worth sitting still for. That means more than you know. Thank you for being here. Now, let's get back to Black Ridge. The meeting had been going for nearly an hour before anyone in that courthouse looked directly at Jasmine. She noticed. She noticed everything now. The way grief sharpens a person's eyes even as it dulls everything else. 3 weeks earlier, her husband Thomas Cooper had gone down into the Redtail claim to check a support beam and never come back up. The mine owners called it an accident. Jasmine had asked, twice, to see the report. Both times she'd been told it was still being drawn up. She had stopped asking a week ago, not because she believed them, but because there was no one left in Black Ridge willing to help a widow ask hard questions of powerful men. What she hadn't expected was for those same powerful men to come collecting on a debt she'd never seen paperwork for. "Your husband borrowed against the homestead deed," Logan Mitchell told her, folding his hands on the table like a man discussing the weather. $400 plus accrued interest. "The estate owes the bank, Mrs. Cooper, and an estate with no income and 7 dependents is what the territorial statute calls an unsecured burden on the town." "I've never seen that loan paper," Jasmine said. "It's on file," Mitchell said. "I'd like to see it." "You will. At the appropriate time." Owen Parker cleared his throat before she could push further. "Mrs. Cooper, the court's obligation here is to the children as much as the debt. Binding them into apprenticeship contracts with paying households until the debt is worked off is not cruelty. It's how this territory has handled hardship cases for 30 years. Hunter Collins, standing near the shackles like a man guarding a church collection plate, didn't say anything at all. He didn't need to. His job was just to make sure nobody in that room forgot the iron was there. Jasmine held Lily a little tighter and looked at her other 6 children in a row beside her. Cody, 13, and trying so hard to stand like a grown man that his jaw had started to ache from clenching it. Dalton, 10, quiet, watching the shackles instead of the judge. The twins Ruth and Rosemary, 7 years old, holding hands so tightly their knuckles had gone pale. Jackson, 5, who kept looking up at his mother for a signal that this was some kind of game. And Emily, 4, gripping a cloth rabbit with one ear chewed soft from years of comfort. "You will not split my children into 7 directions to settle a debt I've never been shown," Jasmine said, and her voice did not shake, though everything else in her wanted to. "I'll work it myself. Take my hands, not theirs. One woman's hands, Mitchell said, almost gently. Can't clear $400 before the snow closes the passes. I'm sorry, Mrs. Cooper. I truly am. He wasn't. Jasmine had known Logan Mitchell for 9 years, long enough to recognize the particular stillness in his face when he was enjoying something he'd worked hard to make look accidental. Owen Parker lifted his pen toward the separation order. That was when the double doors at the back of the hall opened, and the whole room turned as one, the way a field of wheat turns when the wind changes direction. Garrett Lawson didn't hurry. He never did. He walked the length of that courthouse in a heavy oiled coat that had seen more winters on a mountain than most of the men in that room had seen anywhere. His boots loud on the floorboards, his eyes fixed on the judge's bench like a man walking toward a debt of his own that he intended to finally collect. He was somewhere past his 35th year, broad through the shoulders in the way that came from splitting his own wood and hauling his own water for over a decade, with a dark beard he hadn't bothered to trim and hair that brushed his collar. There was an old scar along his left jaw, thin and pale, the kind a man only gets from a blade or a very bad year. His eyes were the color of creek water in early spring, pale, clear, and much calmer than anyone in that room had a right to expect from him. He set the saddlebag down on the bench hard enough that the gavel jumped. That's $420 in silver, Garrett said, 20 more than owed, in case interest ran higher than you're telling her. He looked at Jasmine for the first time, and something in his face gentled, just slightly, just enough for her to notice. Then he looked back at the 3 men who'd been about to take her children from her. Put the chains away, I'm taking her, and all 7. Hunter Collins found his voice first. Now hold on, Lawson. You don't have standing here. She's not your kin, and those children aren't. They will be, soon as she agrees to it, Garrett said. I'm not asking the court's permission to be a decent man. I'm telling this room what's happening, so nobody downstairs pretends later they didn't understand plain English. Owen Parker's pen hovered, uncertain now, above paper that suddenly meant nothing. Logan Mitchell's jaw tightened in a way that told Jasmine, later, once she'd had time to think it over, that this outcome bothered him a great deal more than the loss of $400 should have. Jasmine looked up at this stranger, this man the whole valley spoke of the way people speak of weather they can't control, and made a decision faster than she'd made any decision since the day she buried her husband. I don't know you, she said quietly. No, ma'am, you don't, Garrett said. But you know exactly what these 3 men were fixing to do to your children 5 minutes ago. Pick whichever unknown feels safer. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even especially kind, on its surface. But it was honest, and honesty had become the rarest thing in Jasmine Cooper's life. She nodded once, gathered Lily against her shoulder, and stood. Cody, Dalton, girls, Jackson, Emily. We're leaving, she said. Together. They rode out of Black Ridge before the light failed, 7 children and 1 exhausted mother, packed into the bed of a timber wagon, behind a man none of them had ever exchanged more than a nod with. Cody sat closest to the front, arms crossed, watching the back of Garrett's coat the way a person watches a rattlesnake they've decided not to trust just because it hasn't struck yet. Why'd you do it? Cody finally asked, over the creak of the wheels. $400 is a lot to hand over for people you don't even know. Garrett didn't turn around. I knew your father, he said, better than you'd guess, and I've got debts of my own that don't get settled with silver. That was all he offered. Cody filed it away, the way a careful boy files away anything that doesn't add up yet, and watched the trees close in around the road as it climbed. By the time they reached the fork where the wagon track turned uphill toward Widow's Peak, Garrett pulled the horses to a stop and pointed at a low, sticky-looking patch along the wheel rims. Pine pitch, he said, to nobody in particular, though Dalton leaned forward to listen. Melt it down. Work it into the wood, and it seals the grain against snowmelt all winter. My father taught me that on a wagon half this size. Costs nothing but time, and it'll save you a busted axle come January. Dalton nodded slowly, filing it next to whatever else lived in that quiet, watchful head of his. Jasmine, holding Lily against the cold, allowed herself, for the first time in 3 weeks, one full breath that didn't hurt on the way out. Garrett's homestead sat in a fold of the mountain where the wind couldn't quite reach, a long timber-framed house with a stone chimney at each end, and a barn built solid enough to survive 100 winters. It was bigger than anything Jasmine had expected from a man who lived, by every account in Black Ridge, entirely alone. Built it over 6 years, Garrett said, as the children spilled out of the wagon and stood staring up at it. Figured a man ought to have somewhere worth coming home to, even if there wasn't anybody waiting in it yet. There was an awkwardness to the first evening that no amount of warm stew could entirely dissolve. 7 children and their mother did not simply fold into a stranger's house the way water finds the bottom of a jar. Cody kept his coat on for the first hour, as if he expected to need to leave in a hurry. The twins stayed shoulder to shoulder in every room. Jackson, 5 years old and incapable of sustained suspicion, was the first to break the ice by asking Garrett whether the antlers mounted over the fireplace had ever tried to bite anyone. "Not since I shot them," Garrett said, and something that might have been a smile moved under his beard. It was Emily, though, who did the most good that first night, without meaning to do anything at all. She marched her cloth rabbit, worn soft from years of being loved too hard, over to the hearth, and set it down with great ceremony. "He needs to be warm," she informed the room. "He gets cold ears." "Does he?" Garrett said, crouching down to her eye level with the careful solemnity of a man who understood exactly how much this mattered. "Well, that spot by the fire's the best one in the house. He's welcome to it." Jasmine watched this exchange from across the room and felt something in her chest loosen that had been clenched since the courthouse. A man who could take a 4-year-old's imaginary rabbit seriously was not a man who'd hand her children back to Logan Mitchell over a disagreement about firewood. Later, once the younger ones were asleep and Cody had finally, grudgingly, taken his coat off, Jasmine found Garrett on the porch, splitting kindling by lantern light, though there was already a full box of it stacked by the door. "You didn't need to buy us," she said. "You could have simply told the court the debt was fraudulent and let a lawyer sort it." "Lawyers in Black Ridge answer to the same 3 men who wrote up that debt," Garrett said, not looking up from the axe. "I've learned the hard way that paper only protects you if the person holding the pen is honest. Silver, at least, is honest. It either gets counted or it doesn't." "That sounds like something learned from experience, not principle." He set the axe down. For a moment, something old and tired crossed his face, there and gone before she could name it. "It is," he said. "We'll get to that part, if you want it. Not tonight, though. Tonight you should sleep. Tomorrow I'll walk you through the deed to this place, since I expect you've had your fill of debts you can't read." The following afternoon, true to his word, Garrett spread out the homestead's original land papers on the kitchen table and walked Jasmine through them line by line. The survey markers, the water rights, the difference between a mortgage and a lien, the exact clause that had let Logan Mitchell claim Thomas's debt superseded Jasmine's own name on the deed. "Any paper somebody hands you to sign," Garrett told her, tapping the page. "Read every line twice before your name goes on it. And if a clause uses 10 words where 2 would do, that's usually the clause worth worrying about. Your husband likely trusted the wrong reading of 2 lines in a stack of 40. It happens to good men every day in this territory, and it's how banks like Mitchell's stay fat through hard winters." Cody, listening from the doorway longer than he probably intended to, finally stepped fully into the room. "Teach me too," he said. "If I'm going to be the one signing things someday, I want to know what I'm signing." Garrett looked at the boy for a long moment, long enough that Jasmine wondered what exactly he was measuring, and then nodded once, like a man closing a deal he respected. "Pull up a chair," he said. "This part matters more than most schooling you'll get out here." The illness came on Lily quietly, the way the worst things do. A little warmth in her cheeks on Tuesday, a rattle in her breathing by Wednesday night that Jasmine recognized immediately, and hated recognizing, because she had heard that same sound once before, in a different winter, with a different child who hadn't made it through till morning. Croup, Jasmine said, pacing the floor with Lily hot and fretful against her shoulder. It's croup, and it's bad. Garrett was already moving before she finished the sentence, pulling a battered tin box down from a high shelf and setting a kettle over the fire. Eucalyptus leaf and mullein, he said, working quickly, steeped and turned to steam. It won't cure her, but it'll open her airway enough that she can rest, and rest is half the fight with a fever this age. He glanced at Jasmine, gauging how much explanation she had room to hear right now. My mother kept both growing in pots by a south window, every winter of my childhood. Half the settlements out here would lose twice as many children if somebody hadn't carried that knowledge west with them. They worked through the night in shifts that weren't really shifts, since neither of them left the room. Garrett held the makeshift steam tent while Jasmine coaxed sips of willow bark tea past Lily's cracked lips for the fever. Cody, unable to sleep, sat outside the door with Dalton, both boys silent, both listening for a change in the sound coming through the wall. Near 4 in the morning, Lily's breathing finally eased into something closer to ordinary sleep. Jasmine sat back against the wall of the small room, hollowed out with relief and exhaustion in equal measure, and found Garrett watching her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not the careful stillness he wore in daylight, but something rawer. "You've done this before," she said. "Nursed a fevered child through the night. That's not a skill men usually keep close at hand." "I had a brother," Garrett said, younger. "He didn't make it past his 6th winter, out on a claim with no doctor for 60 miles, and a mother who knew half of what she needed to know, and not the other half. I've spent every year since making sure I knew the other half, in case I was ever handed the chance to use it properly." He looked down at Lily's small, damp face. "Looks like tonight was that chance." Jasmine reached over, without entirely deciding to, and rested her hand over his on the edge of the wash basin. He didn't pull away. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for tonight. For all of it. The courthouse, the roof, the medicine. I haven't let myself say it properly yet, so I'm saying it now, before I lose the nerve. You don't owe me thanks for doing what any decent person should have done in that room," Garrett said. "But I'll take it anyway, since it's been a long while since anybody offered." Neither of them moved their hands for a long moment. Outside, the first hard frost of the season was settling over Widow's Peak, and inside, something quieter and warmer than either of them was ready to name out loud, had begun settling in its place. By morning, Lily's fever had broken. Jackson and Emily, informed at breakfast that the baby was going to be fine, celebrated by declaring an entirely unauthorized snowball contest in the yard, which Dalton won by a wide margin through what Cody dryly called unsporting patience, waiting behind the woodpile until his siblings had exhausted their ammunition before launching his own. Garrett watched the chaos from the porch with the closest thing to open contentment Jasmine had yet seen cross his face. "Never had this much noise on this mountain before," he said. "Does it bother you?" "No," he said, and meant it. "I believe I've been waiting on it longer than I let myself admit." It was Cody who found the poster, 3 weeks into their stay, tucked in the back of an old trunk while searching for a spare lantern wick. The paper had yellowed and cracked along its folds, but the words across the top were still legible enough to stop a 13-year-old boy cold in an empty room. Wanted. Garrett Lawson. Grand theft, railroad payroll, reward $200. Cody read it twice, then carried it downstairs and set it on the kitchen table in front of Garrett without a word, the way a boy sets down evidence he's not yet sure he wants to be right about. Garrett looked at the poster for a long moment. He didn't reach for it. He didn't deny it either. "That's 11 years old," he said finally. "And it's wrong. Though I understand you've got no particular reason to take my word over a printed page." "Wrong how?" Cody asked. His voice had gone hard, protective. The voice of a boy who had already lost one father and wasn't prepared to have handed his mother and siblings to a second lie. "I didn't steal that payroll," Garrett said. "I was blamed for it by a man who did, and who was young enough and well-connected enough back then to make the blame stick to somebody without family to speak up for him. I did 3 years in the territorial prison at Deer Lodge before the matter got quietly dropped, though nobody ever bothered to print a correction. A dropped charge doesn't undo a printed poster, son. People remember the accusation. They forget the outcome. Who was it? Cody asked. The man who actually did it. Garrett met his eyes steadily. I'll tell you when I've got proof solid enough that you don't have to simply take my word for it a second time. I've spent 11 years being the man this territory whispers about. I won't ask a 13-year-old to be the one person who has to trust me on faith alone. Jasmine, standing in the doorway, had heard enough of the exchange to feel the ground shift slightly under her own trust as well. That night, once the children were settled, she asked Garrett to walk with her along the tree line, where the conversation could happen without small ears close enough to catch every word. Is it true? She asked. All of it, the prison, the accusation? The prison's true, Garrett said. The accusation is a lie built on just enough truth to survive. I was on the mountain the night that payroll went missing, same as I've been on this mountain every night for 11 years since. Except that night, I happened to be riding through Black Ridge to fetch a doctor for a sick neighbor, which put me exactly where a guilty man would want a witness to place him, nowhere near an alibi, and close enough to the robbery to make a convenient name for somebody else's crime. Whose crime? Garrett was quiet for a moment, watching the tree line the way a man watches something he's spent a long time not looking at directly. I have a strong notion, he said. I don't have proof, not yet. I'd rather hand you certainty than suspicion, Jasmine. You've had enough men's half-truths handed to you lately to last a lifetime. She studied him in the moonlight, the tired honesty in his face, the careful way he'd stopped short of naming Logan Mitchell outright, even though every unspoken inch of the conversation pointed there. I believe you, she said. Not because the story's convenient. Because it's the only one you've told me so far that cost you something to say out loud. He didn't answer with words. He reached over instead and took her hand, gently, the way a man handles something he's afraid might still refuse him. And she let him. And for a little while the cold mountain air didn't feel quite so cold. Dalton found it, in the end. Quiet, watchful Dalton, who noticed things his louder siblings walked straight past. He'd been chasing a barn cat through the old equipment shed behind the house when a loose board near the floor caught his boot heel, and behind it, wrapped in oilcloth to keep out the damp, sat a leather ledger and a bundle of letters addressed to a name Dalton didn't recognize. He brought it to Cody first, the two of them spreading the papers across the hayloft floor by lantern light, like a pair of small, serious lawyers. This is Pa's ledger, Cody said slowly, running a finger down a column of numbers he half recognized from watching his father work the homestead accounts. But it's got Mitchell's bank stamp on half these pages. And this letter. He stopped, reading it twice to make sure he had it right, then a third time because he still couldn't quite believe it. This letter's from Owen Parker to Logan Mitchell. It talks about a payroll robbery, and a name they needed to, quote, settle the blame on, given his lack of standing in town. They carried the find to Garrett and Jasmine that same night. Garrett read the letters twice through, his jaw tightening with each page, and when he finally set them down, his hands were not entirely steady. Mitchell robbed that payroll himself, he said. Parker helped him bury it in the court records, and I was the name they picked to settle the blame on, because a mountain man with no family in town couldn't afford a lawyer to fight back. 11 years, and here it is, in his own bank's handwriting. There's more, Dalton said quietly, and pointed to a second bundle. This is about Pa's debt. Look at the date on the original loan versus the date on the one they showed Mama in court. The numbers don't match. Somebody added a line after Pa signed it. Jasmine went very still, reading the two documents side by side. The original loan, in her husband's own careful hand, was for $150. The version Logan Mitchell had presented in court, $400, bore a suspiciously fresh addition in the margin, in ink that hadn't aged the same way as the rest of the page. He forged it, she said, quiet and furious. After Thomas died, he forged the debt higher, knowing a widow with 7 children couldn't fight it, And he nearly took my children from me over a number he invented. There's a reason for that too, Garrett said grimly, cross-referencing a final page. Your husband's claim sat over a silver seam Mitchell's own surveyor flagged 8 months before the accident. Mitchell didn't just want the debt settled, he wanted the land. Your children were never the point, Jasmine. They were leverage to get you to walk away from ground worth 10 times what he claimed you owed him. The room went quiet with the particular weight of understanding something that had been hidden in plain sight for weeks. Cody was the one who finally spoke, his voice steady in a way that made him sound older than 13 for the first time since they'd arrived on the mountain. So we take this to the marshal, he said. All of it, together. We will, Garrett said, but Mitchell's had 11 years to build friends in this territory, and men like him don't go down quiet. We should expect he'll come here first, before he lets a marshal from another county anywhere near this ledger. He was right to expect it. He simply hadn't expected how soon. The posse came up the mountain 3 nights later, in the teeth of the season's first real blizzard, torches sputtering against horizontal snow, Hunter Collins at the front, waving a warrant that was 11 years stale and newly reprinted anyway. Lawson! Collins shouted up at the dark house. Old charge never got formally dropped on the books, whatever you've been telling folks. And Mitchell's filed a fresh claim on those 7 children as unlawfully removed from the town's jurisdiction. Send them out, and the boy who's been running his mouth about ledgers, and we'll call this a peaceable night. Inside, Garrett was already moving, shuttering windows, banking the fire low, positioning the children in the cellar with Jasmine, while Cody, refusing flatly to be sent down with the younger ones, stood at Garrett's side with a lantern and a length of rope. Snow load on the north slope, Garrett said, low and fast. We drop it onto the trail behind them, it won't hurt a soul, but it'll scatter every horse in that posse and buy us time to talk instead of fight. Cody nodded, already moving toward the pulley system Garrett had rigged along the ridge that very autumn, more out of old habit than any expectation he'd need it for exactly this. The plan worked cleaner than either of them had dared hope. The released snow came down with a low, rolling thunder that sent horses rearing and scattering into the dark, and in the confused 30 seconds that followed, Garrett came down off the ridge and disarmed Hunter Collins hand to hand before the man had fully gathered his footing, twisting the pistol free and pinning him against the porch rail with considerably more restraint than 11 years of resentment might have justified. You're carrying Mitchell's forged debt in your coat pocket right now, Garrett said, patting Collins down and coming away with a folded copy of the very papers Dalton had found in the shed, signed and dated after Thomas Cooper was already 3 weeks in the ground. That's not a warrant, Hunter. That's a confession, and you've been carrying it around like a badge of honor. Collins, breathing hard and thoroughly disarmed, didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence, in front of the 2 other posse members who'd stopped scrambling after horses long enough to hear every word, said enough on its own. It was in the scramble to secure Collins that a blade meant for Garrett's ribs caught his shoulder instead. A shallow, ugly cut that bled freely but missed anything vital. Jasmine, emerging from the cellar the moment the shouting stopped, found him bracing against the porch post with one hand pressed hard over the wound. Sit, she said, already reaching for clean cloth and the same medicine box that had saved Lily weeks earlier. You've done enough tonight. Let somebody take care of you for a change. I've been taking care of myself a long while, Garrett said, hissing as she worked. Not sure I entirely remember how to let somebody else do it. Then let this be practice, Jasmine said, and there was nothing careful left in her voice. No widow's caution, no measured distance. Only the plain, unguarded truth of a woman who had stopped pretending, weeks ago, that this man was simply a debt she owed for her children's freedom. I love you, Garrett Lawson. I've known it since the night you sat up with Lily, and didn't once make it about yourself. I should have said it before you went and got yourself stabbed, proving it to me all over again. Garrett went still under her hands, snow still falling soft around the porch. Hunter Collins bound and silent a few feet away. "I've loved you since you stood up in that courthouse and told 3 powerful men no," he said. "I just didn't think I'd earned the right to say it yet." "You earned it the day you put that saddlebag on the bench," Jasmine said, and kissed him, careful of the wound, sure of everything else. Hunter Collins talked, "In the end, the way men who've spent a lifetime enforcing other people's crimes usually do once the consequences finally point back at them personally." He confirmed the forged debt, the buried silver survey, and, under the weight of a federal marshal's questioning 3 days later in Black Ridge, the payroll robbery 11 years past, laying every piece of it squarely at Logan Mitchell's feet, with Owen Parker's complicity following close behind. The trial that followed drew half the town into the same courthouse where Jasmine had once sat holding Lily while 3 men decided whether to take her children away in chains. This time, Garrett stood beside her, his shoulder still bandaged, while she laid the ledger, the letters, and the forged loan across the very table where the shackles had once sat. "You built a fortune on other people's grief," Jasmine told Logan Mitchell, in front of the whole gathered town, her voice carrying clean to the back rows. "You forged a debt against a widow, framed an innocent man for your own crime, and called all of it lawful because you wore a good suit while you did it. That ends today." Logan Mitchell lost the bank, the land claim, and his freedom, sentenced to serve the territorial prison term Garrett Lawson had wrongly carried for 11 years. Owen Parker was disbarred and stripped of his judgeship, his own signature on the buried correspondence leaving no room for the town to look away this time. Hunter Collins, for his cooperation with the marshal, was spared prison but stripped of his badge for good, sent out of Black Ridge to make whatever honest living he could find in a county that hadn't heard his name yet. Garrett Lawson's name, meanwhile, was formally cleared on the territorial record for the first time in 11 years. The old wanted poster replaced by a plain notice of exoneration that Cody insisted on nailing up personally at the general store, in the same spot where the false one had hung for over a decade. The silver seam under the Cooper homestead was surveyed properly, honestly this time, and rather than claim it for herself, Jasmine did something the whole valley talked about for years afterward. She organized the claim into a working cooperative, sharing its output with the very families in Black Ridge who'd stood silent in that courthouse the day the town nearly broke her family apart, on the theory that a town too poor to say no to injustice needed a reason to have enough, so that the next widow who walked into that courthouse wouldn't face the same choice alone. "Justice isn't just punishing the men who did wrong," she told Cody, watching the first cooperative wages get paid out that spring. "It's making sure the next family never needs somebody to ride in with a saddlebag of silver to begin with." Garrett proposed to her on the ridge above the house, in the same spot where the snowslide had scattered Hunter Collins's posse months before, offering a ring he'd carved himself from a piece of high-altitude cedar while the shoulder wound was still healing enough that carving anything had taken him twice as long as it should have. "I've got 7 children and a debt I never finished thanking you for," Jasmine said, laughing through unexpected tears as she looked at the ring. "Then let's call the debt settled," Garrett said, "and start a new ledger, one where nobody owes anybody anything except what they choose to give." They married that spring on Widow's Peak, with all 7 children standing in a row that had once stood in a cold courthouse facing shackles, now standing instead in new spring grass facing a future none of them had dared imagine 3 seasons earlier. Cody stood as a witness beside Garrett, having long since traded suspicion for something closer to the respect one man offers another he's chosen to trust. Dalton kept careful watch over the whole ceremony, missing nothing, the way he never had. The twins scattered wildflowers with theatrical seriousness. Jackson narrated the entire event to anyone within earshot. Emily's cloth rabbit sat, warm and honored, in the front row. And Lily, walking now, took her first unassisted steps across the grass, directly toward the 2 people who had built, out of iron and silver, and a debt neither of them had planned to pay, an entirely unexpected family. Before we close this one out, I want to say something to you directly. If Jasmine and Garrett's story gave you even a moment of hope tonight, please take 10 seconds and subscribe, like this video, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. This channel grows one viewer at a time, and every single one of you matters more to that than any algorithm ever could. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means everything. Thank you so much for spending this evening in Blackridge with Jasmine, Garrett, and all 7 children who refused to be separated by men who valued paperwork over people. Their story is a reminder that the people who show up quietly, without asking for anything in return, are often the ones who change everything, and that real wealth was never the silver under that mountain. It was the family that chose to stand together, in a courthouse and everywhere after. If this story stayed with you, subscribe, share it with someone who needs a little hope tonight, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Until then, stay warm, stay close to the people who choose you, and take care of one another.